Hey everyone, welcome back to the Showing Up to Your Life podcast and YouTube channel. My name is Art Burns and I wish you well today. Hope you're all having a great day. I hope you're able to meet the day with some presence, with acceptance of what you're finding and letting go of your expectations, applying a little curiosity to your unfolding situation and experience. And most of all, I hope that you're being compassionate to others and especially to yourself, right? So often, and I talk about this a lot, and this is what we're going to talk about here today, is that, we are so willing to offer compassion to others, right? When we see someone else suffering, we see somebody who has failed, we see somebody who is having a difficult time, see somebody who's suffering in any kind of way. When we notice that suffering, we are moved to a compassion for that person, to suffer with them. That's what the word compassion means. It comes from the Latin cum pare, which means to suffer with. And so when we can suffer with someone, then we stand with them in their suffering, and we make action, and we express the desire for their suffering to end. And that's what makes the beautiful thing about compassion. That's what makes compassion so beautiful, and what makes living among others and the ability to express that for others. It makes life a very, very beautiful thing. But the thing is that most of us, we don't do the same. When it's us who is, who is suffering, when it's us who has failed, when it's us who is just screwed up in some way, what do we usually do, right? We don't talk to ourselves the same way we talk to someone else. We don't speak kindly. We don't offer support to ourselves, not automatically anyway, not most people. Instead, what we're doing is we're beating ourselves up over it. Right? We're saying, you got to do better. You're don't be so blah blah, next time, and we beat ourselves up, right? And of course, this comes from a lot of different places, right? This is not, necessarily our fault as individuals, right? When we're kids, right? If we fail on a test in school, right? What happens? You get that big red F at the top of the paper, right? And you have to, that F, you have to bring that home to your mom or dad and have them sign it, or your caregiver, and you have to bring it back to the teacher, and oftentimes, your parents would have felt that they have an obligation to somehow, maybe either punish you for the failure, or to somehow pressure you to do better next time. Of course, everybody had good intentions all along the way, right? Your teacher, your parents, your caregivers, whoever. We're just trying to get you to learn more and to succeed, right? But in the process of failure, what do we start to feel, right? We start to feel, stress. We start to feel fear, right? And that's where the stress comes from, right? If you get that big red F and you have to bring it home to your parents and have them sign it and bring it back, all that's doing is creating fear for you, right? And of course, again, that fear turns to stress in your body, right? And of course, that's not the only place, right, where we feel the failure, right? We, on sports teams, you lose the game, you are the loser, right? You have the same thing in jobs and in several areas of our lives, right? There's always, and of course, our parents, right? How were our parents, parented when they were kids, right? Were their parents very hard on them when they failed? And so therefore, are our parents, continuing that trend and that process and being hard on us because that's what they feel they're supposed to do, right? Most of the time the answer to that question is yes. And so if we grow up afraid to fail, right? And of course, many of you might be sitting here saying, well, yeah, I mean, failing isn't good. We should try to succeed, right? And yeah, that's true, right? We don't want to have a life of failure after failure after failure because there's going to be consequences to that. Yeah, so it is, there is this need to succeed, right? But the problem is that when we frame failure around this thing that is, sort of a source of shame or a source of fear, as I say, which again, ultimately becomes stress in our bodies, right? What we do then is we become afraid of failure. And there's a big difference between being afraid of failure and wanting to succeed. There's a huge difference between those two concepts, right? And unfortunately, for most of us walking around in our world, we are afraid of failure because of the way it has felt our whole life, right? And of course, as I've talked about here before, right? When your teacher is scolding you for your failure, your parents are scolding you for your failure, your soccer coach is scolding you for your failure, your whatever other things that you're doing, every time you fail, if you are feeling a level of harsh talk from others in light of your failing, right? Then that's the talk that's going to start happening inside yourself. Right? That's how you're going to start talking to yourself when you fail, right? So you're going to sound like your third grade teacher, right? Who told you, you've been over this time and time again, why can't you get it right? Kind of stuff. And that's how people talked to me when I was in third grade. I hope that's not the case for you, right? But again, maybe it's the parents, maybe it's the grandparents, an uncle, an aunt, something, right? Other friends, right? Like when we fail, I mean, our peers can be extremely critical of us and not very kind in their criticism, right? And so the point is that all of this talk that people, throughout our lives in the face of failure, all of this becomes our own self-talk, right? And so if people around us are talking to us like, with harsh criticism and really, critical, I just said criticism, but if people are talking to us in a way that is unkind, right, as in the face of our failure, then we learn to be unkind in the face of our failure, right? And again, this bruise and this develops in us this fear of failure. Now, what is the other thing we could say? If how's the other way we can express a fear of failure, right? Well, what it becomes is this this sense that we have to get everything right. So the other way to say fear of failure is perfectionism, right? And that translates into all areas of our lives, right? Perfectionism in our body, image, perfectionism in our performance, job performance, perfectionism in our spouse, right? Like do we feel like a failure if we don't get a person who's flawless, right? And this kind of becomes a really, really big psychological issue for many people. But the end result, right? The end result of all of this fear of failure is that we become afraid to take chances, right? And when we become afraid to take chances, what we ultimately are doing is we're becoming afraid to live our lives on a full and bountiful way. Right? Instead, we're going to become very conservative. We're going to become very, no, I'm okay, don't worry about me, please don't worry about me, I'm good, you don't have to trouble yourself over me, I mean, me, I don't matter, right? And that's what happens, right? And so what can we do to reverse this? What can we do to relieve this problem for ourselves and to become less afraid of failure? Because that's really what life is supposed to be, right? Life is a series. You could say that life is a series of failures and course corrections and adjustments to the, because that's what learning is, right? Like when you learn to ride a bike, right? You don't learn when everything's going well. You learn when you do something, you fall. Right? Like that's when, the skin knee or the bruised elbow, that's what makes you learn, because you're like, okay, I don't want to do that again, right? So let me try again, right? Let me figure out how to do this so that thing doesn't happen again, right? But of course, we don't, I hope that we don't, as little kids, we shouldn't, be saying like, well, I fell and I skinned my knee, so therefore I'm a terrible, terrible person, right? Of course we don't say that when we're kids, but do we start saying that as adults? I walk my clients through this really interesting thought experiment. I find it interesting. That's why I do it. And basically, I ask my clients. I say, okay, here's the picture, right? Here's the scene. You're walking through a shopping mall one day, right? And for whatever reason, the shopping mall on this particular day is very empty. There's very few people around, but there is one other person who's approaching you as you're walking. You're about to pass each other, right? And all things considered, you probably wouldn't even notice this person. Like, there's nothing striking about them. There's nothing standing out in any kind of way. It's just a person, right, who you're just about to pass, except for the fact that about 10 feet in front of you, right, just before you pass each other, this person steps in a in a puddle of melted frozen yogurt. Right, and as soon as they hit that frozen yogurt, they fall flat on their face. Right, their shopping bags go flying. They're literally sprawled out on the floor right in front of you, maybe even bleeding from their nose. Right, and so I give my clients two options. Okay, here's your two options of response to what you're seeing. Right, option A, you put down whatever you're carrying, you kneel down next to the person. You maybe let's pretend it's pre-COVID time. So you bend down next to the person, you put your hand on their shoulder or on their back or whatever, and you say something along the lines of, "I'm here for you, don't worry. Do you feel like you're hurt? Do you need medical attention? I'm here to help you." Right? Something along those lines, right? "I'll get help for you. I've already called help." Something like that, right? "But I'm here with you and I'm here to help you." That's option A. Option B, you stand there, you put your hands on your hips, and you look at the person sprawled out there, writhing on the floor, embarrassed and ashamed, possibly injured, just absolutely having the horrible time, right? Like, this is one of the worst moments this person can remember having, right? And you stand there with your hands on your hips and you say, "Really? I mean, you really didn't see that yogurt sitting there on the floor? I mean, it's a pretty big puddle. You really didn't see that? Gosh, I don't know what you were thinking about, that you stepped in that puddle and now look at yourself. Really? I mean, you probably fall all the time like this, don't you? Gosh, you must be a special kind of stupid. Really?" Right? Now, of course, when I say this, people start laughing. They're like, no, I would never say that. Of course not. How could I? I would always say A, right? Like everybody, every single person who I've mentioned this to, right? And it's been, dozens, scores of people, right? And every single one of them says the same thing. Like, no, of course I would do A. Everyone would do A. How could you not do A? Are you just, some kind of cruel, sadistic psychopath, right? And of course that's true. But now I go to the second step of this little thought experiment. And I say, okay, great. Now, it's you on the floor. Right? You're the one who stepped in the frozen yogurt. You're the one that fell flat on your face. Your bags went everywhere. The gifts that you bought for your friends or whatever, they're all rolling around on the floor, and you're mortified, and you're in pain, and you're a little scared, and you're just, your whole life has been turned around. Same two options. Which one do you say? Do you say, "Oh my gosh, I'm here for you. It's okay. We're gonna be all right. I'm here to see you through this. Like, don't worry. We'll get help if we need it, but everything's gonna be okay," right? Or do you say, "I can't believe what you just did. How could you possibly, you are so embarrassed right now. I can't believe you did this. You are just so dumb. How did you not see that frozen yogurt? Now look at you. Your clothes are ruined. You're bleeding. This person is like kneeling over you. Like what's wrong with you?" And if the people I'm talking to are honest, which all of my clients so far have been, nearly 100, I think 100% of them have said, Yeah, I do B. Yeah, if it's me, it's definitely B. Yeah, definitely. And that's because of, what I'm talking about here, right? That comes from how we were treated in the face of failure, right? And so how can we, now of course we can't go back in time and make our third grade teacher treat us nicer when we failed a spelling test or something like that, right? We can't go back to our soccer coach and say, "Don't yell at me for making mistakes." We can't, we can't go back in time and fix all this, right? So what can we do? Right? Well, what we can do is starting today, starting right now, we can start being compassionate towards ourselves, right? And it's very, very simple, right? It's a very, very simple thing. It's simple, but it's not easy, right? Because again, we've had all this time that we've built these habits of beating ourselves up over failure, of feeling that shame in our failure, right? Because it's not even if we're just talking to ourselves in a certain way, but just the automatic feeling of shame in the face of failure, right? And so what we can do is, starting right now, we can be kind to ourselves and we can be supportive to ourselves, especially in the face of failure. I mean, be supportive of yourself all the time, sure, but specifically, when it's time for failure. Because again, what is failure, right? Somebody one time, made up this great little acronym for failure, right? Or fail. And the acronym says FAIL, right? First attempt in learning, right? Anything that you're trying to do, right? Anything that you're trying to learn how to do, right? In the beginning, you're terrible at it, right? Maybe some of us have a natural inclination towards other things, but generally speaking, right? If you've never drawn before and you go into a first time going into a drawing class, right? The first few weeks you're going to be terrible, right? But what happens though? You keep practicing, right? And if you keep practicing, right? And if you have a supportive teacher, then they won't say, oh, you failed this first time and you're no good at drawing, so give it up, just give your charcoals away, give your pad to someone and get out of this class, right? like could you imagine somebody saying that to you as an adult, like an adult teacher? But so so the idea is then, right, that if we see a failure as a part of a process of learning, that's the key, right? Most of us look at failure as an end result, right? We tried, we failed. It's done, right? But if we can reframe that and think of failure as a midpoint in a process, right? Like, I'm learning how to draw. This is a 10-week course. So after the first couple of weeks, I'm not going to evaluate anything until I get to 10 weeks, right? Because in the 8th, 9th, and 10th week, maybe I'll be pretty good at this. I won't be so bad at it as I am in the first couple of weeks, right? And that goes for everything in our lives, right? In our work, in our relationships, in our parenting, right? Like, when things go wrong, try to see that as something that is a midpoint. This is an opportunity to learn, right? But here's the thing, you probably know this from listening to some of my podcasts at this point. We cannot learn if we are experiencing fear, right? Because when we experience fear on a deep enough, pardon me, very sorry about that, sorry. Excuse me, when we feel fear on a deep enough level, it turns into stress, right? And it doesn't take that deep a level either. Fear becomes stress very, very quickly for us, right? And when we are in the stress response of our body, we're literally not able to remember things, right? Which means that we're not able to learn, right? Which means that we're not able to progress, which means that by beating ourselves up and being afraid of failure, we're never going to get better. So therefore, the failure does become an end point and not just a stage of the learning process, right? So what's the one thing we can do to teach ourselves not to be so afraid of failure, but instead be kind to ourselves in the state of failure, and to learn from the failure and to grow through the failure and to become something better than what we are at this moment in relationship to whatever this skill is that we're talking about, right? Well, the way that we can do this, the number one most effective way to do this, is through self-compassion, right? Noticing that, yeah, I just screwed something up. This is bad. This is hard. This is a very, very difficult moment for me, and I'm feeling all kinds of emotions of shame, of guilt, I'm feeling all of it. Okay, noticing that, right? Like, being mindful of it, turning towards it, right? Which is what we learn to do in mindfulness, right? Because again, it goes down to that non-judging aspect, right? This is not a bad experience and it's not a good experience. It's just an experience, right? And so we can turn towards it and recognize the feelings that this experience has produced in us, recognize the emotions that are bubbling up and arising for us, right? Notice it, right? Be present with it. Hold space for it. Allow yourself to feel it. Now, remind yourself that everybody fails sometimes, right? And a lot of times it's helpful to actually use the exact thing that you're trying to do, right? So for instance, if you're trying to learn how to draw or play a musical instrument or something like that, right? And you're in your mid-30s and you're trying this new thing, right? And it's going really hard. It's not going very well and easy for you. It's a struggle, right? Well, in that moment, you can stop and you can recognize the fact that everyone who is in their 30s and tries to learn how to do this thing that I'm trying to do, play guitar, draw pictures, whatever it is, charcoal figure drawing or something, everybody who tries to pick this up in their mid-30s is going to be just as bad as I am at it, and is going to have just as hard time with it, right? And that can be applied to anything, right? Like, so if you're having a struggle with your stepchildren, right? Like, you can say, like, every person who is the stepmother of a 12-year-old girl is going through very, very similar trials and difficulties that I'm going through, right? Like, there's nothing different about me in the face of this experience, right? And just doing that, just connecting to others through your suffering is already going to make you feel like, oh, okay, it's not just me. All of a sudden now I'm not as afraid of it. I'm not as kind of guilty or shameful about it. It's like, okay, well, everybody's going through this hard time, so it's not a problem. Like, I can just work on it. I can just keep trying now, right? And then finally, as you're, this dialogue that you're having with yourself, it's oftentimes it's very helpful to consider, talking to someone else, right? Like, pretend it's someone else who's in your position. Every single detail about the situation is exactly what it is, except instead of you in this situation, instead of you lying on the floor with your belongings all over the place and some stranger picking your stuff up for you, and you got a dizzy head and you're bleeding from your nose, instead of you sitting there, picture someone else, right? And either someone you really love or even a complete stranger, because again, we are much more likely to approach a complete stranger and offer them compassion and kindness than we are to offer that to ourselves. So pretend it's somebody else and talk to yourself the way that you would talk to that person, right? Which again is something like, like, hey, I'm here for you. It's okay. It's okay that you fell down. It's okay that you're embarrassed about it. I'm here for you, though, and I don't mind. I'm here to help you, right? And when we can talk to ourselves in those kind of ways, in the face of failure, in the face of difficulty, in the face of times where we're just struggling, right? If we can talk to ourselves that way, then what we do is we ease that fear of failure. We ease that stress that comes from that fear, right? And then ultimately, and not very long either, it takes maybe a few weeks of practice, but you're going to find yourself doing this all the time. And what you're going to find then is a higher level of resilience. You're going to find lower levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. You're going to find a much lower level of perfectionism, right? Perfectionism of your body, perfectionism of your performance, perfectionism of your speech, right? Like this video here, I had to clear my throat in the middle of the video. That's horrible. That's a terrible, unprofessional videography kind of thing to do, right? And maybe in the past, I would have hit the stop button. I would have said, dummy, what's wrong with you? And I would have had to redo the whole video, right? But now, you know what? I'm going to just trust that everyone out there is going to forgive me. And if you don't, then you don't. I mean, I can't control what you do. But what I can control is how I talk to myself about it. And say, you know what? You just had to clear your throat. It doesn't make you a bad person. It It doesn't make you a failure because you had to clear your throat. You still had a lot of good things to say here, and so next time maybe we can learn from this, and next time maybe we can drink a little bit more water before we start the video. Maybe you can have even a little lozenge that you have just before you start the video to make sure that you don't have to clear your throat, right? But if I say like, oh, I'll never get this right, I'm just such a terrible video maker, and this is never gonna work, well then what happens? I don't get to deliver all these great points to all of you. And I don't get the emails coming back from you telling me how much it's helping for you, right? And so of course this is a very simple example, but this is the way life goes, right? And again, the idea then is that we, when we start to feel, not afraid of failing, right? Because we're not beating ourselves up over failing. Well, now we're willing to take more chances. We're willing to reach out a little bit more and to kind of climb a little further out on that tree limb and see what's out there. And that is how we can grow. Right? That's how we can grow as people. We can grow as spouses, as friends, as children of parents. And that's where we develop ourselves into something that is a beautifully dynamic and amazing thing that each one of us are. I mean, we all have so many strengths, and we all have so many gifts to give to the world. But sadly, many of us feel like we don't have gifts because we're afraid to fail. And so we don't share our gifts with the world. And so the world suffers, right? And so by working on myself, by allowing myself to be okay with failure and to be okay with struggles, well then really what that ultimately does is it helps you, right? It helps the rest of the world out there. Because now I am willing to be who I really am and to offer my gifts to the world. And you too can offer your gifts to the world. And that's what makes this world a really, really beautiful place. So there's a very simple practice that I just gave you one practice that you can do. Anytime that you feel like you're in a position of struggle or suffering or difficulty on any level, you can just do exactly what I described to you. The 3 steps of just noticing the pain, the suffering, the struggle, the failure, connecting to others. That's a really important one, is to connect to others in the suffering, through the suffering. Right? Telling yourself that nobody, not a single human being that has ever lived, has been completely 100% successful in everything they've done. It literally is not possible, right? And then finally, offering yourself some compassion and some kindness, right? But that third one, that's the hard one. And so there's another really simple practice that you can do on a daily level. I mean, you have to approach it like a practice, right? It's like, I'm going to do this every day until I get better at it, right? And it takes a few weeks of doing this for a few minutes every day, okay, till you get better at it. And what it is getting used to and getting better at speaking to yourself with kindness, okay? And so what that looks like is just simply repeating some phrases to you. The ones that I've come up with that my clients seem to love: may I be well. May I be free from suffering. May I be free from fear and insecurity. May I be forgiven for my mistakes and my misdeeds. May I feel happy, and may I feel loved. Okay, very simple. Just repeat those over and over to yourself for 5 minutes in the morning, maybe 5 minutes again in the evening. And a few weeks later, that is going to start to become the automatic way in which you talk to yourself. Right, which makes a huge difference in what happens when you fail. Like, how do you initially talk to yourself? So if you'd like a written document of those instructions, all you gotta do is ask me for it, okay? And if you'd like some coaching around this, and if you would like to incorporate this into a much bigger sort of practice here of heartfulness and mindfulness, then I would love to talk to you about how to do that. All right, and the way that you can do that is to go onto my website, artburnscoaching.com. Right there on the front page, on every single page, there's a banner across the bottom of the page with a clock on it. Just click on that. You'll go into my calendar, you pick a time and a day that works for you, that's open on mine. They're highlighted in, like, they're grayed out if they're not available or something like that, right? So pick a time that works for you that also is free for me and available to be clicked. Put in like your email address and answer a couple of brief questions, and I got it from there. I will do all the work from there. It will not cost you a penny to do this, and it might change your life. So what do you got to lose, right? Thank you for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back tomorrow and with another very important message that's going to really flow from this one, which has flowed from all of the messages this week. So I look forward to sharing that with you. Have a great day, everybody. I wish you well. Take care.